What if I told you Buick built an engine so powerful, so extreme, that it never even got the chance to dominate? The Stage 2 455 wasn't just another big block. It was a forbidden powerhouse GM tried to erase. It was too fast for the streets, too dangerous for NASCAR, and too much of a threat to the competition. Some say it was a direct attack on the Hemi, a silent rebellion within GM, and a missed opportunity that could have changed muscle car history forever. But why was it buried? And more importantly, who wanted it gone? Buick was never supposed to be a performance brand. It was the luxury division of General Motors, known for its smooth-riding sedans, not tire-shredding muscle cars. While Chevrolet, Pontiac, and Oldsmobile were battling for street supremacy, Buick remained in the background until 1970, when they unleashed the Buick 455, the largest displacement big block engine of its time. This wasn't just a big engine, it was a torque monster. Producing 510 pound-feet of torque at just 2,800 RPM, the 455 wasn't about high revving horsepower, it was about raw, brutal force. Buick had just built an engine that could launch a 2-ton car like a missile, but even that wasn't enough. Buick's engineers saw an opportunity to take the 455 even further. While GM's other divisions were focused on high-revving small blocks, Buick's secret weapon was hidden in plain sight. They developed a Stage 2 package, an upgraded version of the already insane 455. Bigger valves, wilder camshafts, aggressive cylinder heads, and race-ready internals meant this engine wasn't just powerful, it was a weapon. But this weapon never got to see full-scale production, because just as quickly as it appeared, it was wiped from history. But why? The Buick 455 was already a powerhouse, but for a handful of engineers, it wasn't enough. Behind closed doors, away from corporate interference, they began crafting an even deadlier version, one that would push the engine into uncharted territory. They called it Stage 2, and it was never meant to be tamed. The modifications were extreme. The factory cast-iron heads were ditched for high-flow aluminum heads designed to let the engine breathe like a race motor. The camshaft was swapped for a radical solid lifter profile that turned the 455 into a high-revving nightmare. New pistons, upgraded rods, and an aggressive intake manifold meant this engine could easily produce over 500 horsepower, maybe even 600 in the right hands. But here's where things get suspicious. Buick had no plans to limit this beast to just factory cars. They were preparing to take it to NASCAR, the NHRA, and the streets. A factory-backed drag racing program was in the works, and Buick was suddenly knocking on the doors of Mopar's legendary Hemis and Chevrolet's big blocks. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the Stage 2 vanished. Why? Was it GM pulling the plug? Or did the competition fear what was coming? The Stage 2 455 had the potential to rewrite muscle car history, but it never got the chance. Not because it wasn't good enough, but because General Motors made sure it never stood a chance. By the early 1970s, GM had strict corporate policies limiting high-performance development. They had already banned factory-backed racing in 1963, forcing brands like Chevrolet and Pontiac to get creative with under-the-table support. But Buick? They were supposed to stay in their lane, quiet, refined, and non-threatening. Yet suddenly, Buick engineers had built a torque monster that was faster than a Corvette, more brutal than a Chevelle SS, and capable of running with Mopar's legendary 426 Hemi. This was a serious problem for GM's internal hierarchy. How could they let their luxury brand overshadow the company's golden child Chevrolet? The solution? Kill it before it even had a chance to dominate. The Stage 2 package was quietly shelved, production never reached full scale, and the project was abandoned before it could shake up the industry. But was GM acting alone? Or was there pressure from rival automakers who didn't want to compete against this untamed beast? The Stage 2 wasn't just banned, it was erased. But some people weren't willing to let it die. On paper, the stock Buick 455 was already a torque monster, officially rated at 350 to 370 horsepower and a mind-blowing 510 pound-feet of torque. But these numbers didn't tell the whole story. Because the Stage 2 version? That was something else entirely. The Stage 2 package wasn't just an upgrade, it was a complete transformation. The new aluminum heads flowed nearly 50% more air than the factory cast iron ones, allowing the engine to breathe at high RPMs. The upgraded camshaft was so aggressive that it made even the vaunted LS 6454 look tame. Engineers equipped it with forged pistons, a high-rise intake, and a Holley 850 CFM carburetor, all designed to turn the already ferocious 455 into a high-revving race engine. Buick officially rated the Stage 2 at over 500 horsepower, but insiders whispered something much more shocking. Real dyno tests showed the engine producing closer to 600 horsepower. That was Mopar HEMI territory, maybe even beyond. If these numbers were true, Buick had created one of the most powerful muscle car engines of all time. But the world never got to see its full potential, because just as quickly as the truth surfaced, it was buried. But why? NASCAR was already locked in a war of horsepower. Ford had the Boss 429. Chrysler had the 426 HEMI. Chevrolet had the L88 427. But when Buick's Stage 2 455 entered the scene, it shook the entire racing world. In 1970, a handful of independent teams got their hands on the Stage 2 package and prepared to unleash it on NASCAR's superspeedways. The results? Terrifying. Even in its early testing stages, the Stage 2-powered Buicks were outrunning factory-backed Fords and Mopars. NASCAR officials and rival teams started paying attention. This wasn't supposed to happen. Then came the rule changes. Suddenly, NASCAR made major revisions to its homologation requirements, making it virtually impossible for Buick's Stage 2 to qualify. Coincidence? Or was this a calculated move to shut Buick down before they could take over? Some claim Ford and Mopar lobbied behind the scenes to keep the Stage 2 off the track. Others believe GM itself pulled the plug before things got out of control. Either way, Buick's shot at NASCAR dominance was over before it began. But the Stage 2 wasn't done yet. It would find a new battlefield, and this time it was coming for the streets. Buick's Stage 2 455 had been silenced in NASCAR, but the engineers weren't ready to give up. If it couldn't dominate the track, it would dominate the streets. Enter the Buick GSX Stage 2, an unhinged, factory-built street killer that was simply too wild to exist. The stock Buick GSX was already a legend, equipped with the 455 Stage 1 engine that could outrun nearly anything in a straight line. But the Stage 2 package? That was a different beast entirely. With upgraded aluminum heads, a radical solid lifter camshaft, and race-spec internals, the Stage 2-equipped GSX wasn't just fast, it was a menace. This wasn't just speculation. A handful of GSXs were actually fitted with the Stage 2 engine, and what happened next was shocking. These cars were obliterating big-block Chevelle, crushing Boss 429 Mustangs, and embarrassing Mopars on the drag strip. So why didn't Buick mass-produce it? Because it was too dangerous. Insurance companies refused to touch it. GM executives didn't want it competing with the Corvette. And just like that, the Stage 2 GSX was buried before it could change the muscle car world forever. But some of these cars survived, and their story isn't over. The Stage 2 455 was on the verge of rewriting muscle car history, but then, just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. Not because it failed, not because it wasn't fast enough, but because General Motors made sure it never stood a chance. By 1971, GM's top executives were tightening the noose on high-performance development. Corporate policy already limited engines in mid-size cars to 400 cubic inches. Yet Buick had somehow squeezed its massive 455 into the GSX. That alone was bending the rules. But the Stage 2? That was an outright rebellion. The problem? The Stage 2 was simply too powerful. It wasn't just outperforming Chevrolet's legendary 454, it was challenging the Corvette itself. That was something GM couldn't allow. Buick, the quiet luxury brand, was never supposed to be the king of performance. And then came the real killer, the rising pressure from insurance companies and federal regulators. High-powered muscle cars were becoming uninsurable, and emissions laws were tightening. GM used this as the perfect excuse to shut down the Stage 2 project permanently. The most powerful engine Buick had ever built was buried, or so they thought. Because some people refused to let it die. If Buick's Stage 2455 was truly dead, then why did a few cars secretly make it to the track? The official story says GM killed the project, but a handful of racers got their hands on the forbidden engine, and what happened next proved just how dangerous this beast really was. In the early 70s, a few independent drag racers managed to get their hands on Stage 2 parts. What they discovered was shocking. The Stage 2 455 wasn't just competitive, it was a monster. These Buicks were ripping through quarter-mile times in the mid-10s, leaving heavily modified Mopars and big-block Chevys in the dust. But here's where things get even stranger. Some of these racers claimed that GM secretly supplied Stage 2 parts under the table. Even though the project was officially dead, there were whispers that certain high-up figures at Buick were still helping racers keep the dream alive. So, if Buick never intended the Stage 2 to succeed, why did some of its most powerful parts mysteriously show up on the track? Was this GM's way of secretly defying its own rules? Or was Buick trying to send a message? One thing is certain, the Stage 2 wasn't going down without a fight. The Boss 429 Mustang was supposed to be one of the most dominant street cars of its era. With its massive semi-Hemi V8, Ford had built it to crush the competition. But there was one problem. A Buick GSX Stage 2 lined up against a Boss 429 in a legendary street race. And what happened next shocked everyone. The Mustang driver had no reason to fear a Buick. After all, Buicks were for old men, right? But what he didn't realize was that under the hood of this GSX wasn't just any engine, it was the forbidden Stage 2455. The flag dropped, the tires screamed, and the GSX launched like a missile. The Boss 429 tried to catch up, but it was over before it even began. The Buick pulled ahead and never looked back. The Mustang, one of Ford's most powerful muscle cars, had just been humiliated. Word spread fast. People couldn't believe it. How could a Buick beat one of the biggest names in muscle car history? But that was the terrifying truth about the Stage 2. It wasn't just fast. It was faster than anything GM, Ford, or Mopar wanted to admit. And that's exactly why they had to kill it. If the Buick Stage 2 455 was so powerful, where did all the engines go? Why don't we see these cars at auctions, in museums, or dominating classic muscle car events? The answer is as shocking as the engine itself. Most of them simply disappeared. Officially, the Stage 2 never made it to mass production. Buick offered it as a factory performance package, but only a handful of cars were ever fitted with it. Some sources claim only 15 to 20 Stage 2 kits were ever distributed. Others say even fewer cars were actually built. But here's where things get strange. Some of these cars were never seen again. Rumors swirled that Buick executives ordered prototypes destroyed. Others suggest that some Stage 2 cars were sold off quietly, without any official records, to avoid corporate backlash. And then there's the biggest mystery of all, a rumored Stage 2 prototype that GM allegedly locked away. Some believe an original factory-built Stage 2 GSX still exists, hidden in a GM storage facility, untouched for decades. So was the Stage 2 erased from history, or is it still out there, waiting to be discovered? The truth remains buried, for now. During the muscle car era, automakers were notorious for lying about horsepower. Insurance companies and government regulators were cracking down on high-performance cars, so manufacturers downplayed their real numbers to avoid penalties and keep their street monsters alive. But the Buick Stage 2 455, that was a different story. The official horsepower numbers from Buick were deliberately vague, around 500 horsepower they claimed, but those who actually tested the engine knew the truth. It was making much, much more. Independent dyno tests revealed shocking results. Some Stage 2 engines pushed over 600 horsepower in race trim. In the right setup, it could even flirt with 700 horsepower. That was more power than Ford's Boss 429, Chevrolet's LS 6454, and even Mopar's legendary 426 HEMI. So why did Buick hide its true power? Because if GM had acknowledged that their luxury brand had built an engine stronger than anything else in their lineup, it would have caused chaos within the company. This wasn't just a muscle car, it was a street-legal race engine GM never wanted the world to see. And that's why they buried the truth along with the Stage 2 itself. But was it really gone forever? GM may have killed the Stage 2 455 before it reached its full potential, but true gearheads never let legends die. While the factory program was buried, a handful of enthusiasts and racers kept the dream alive, building their own forbidden Stage 2 monsters. Throughout the 1970s and beyond, Buick diehards hunted down every Stage 2 part they could find. The aluminum heads, the radical camshafts, the high-flow intake manifolds. These pieces became gold among street racers and drag racers. Even though Buick had shut down official production, the knowledge and blueprints survived. Some of these underground builds proved exactly what Buick had been hiding. With the right tuning, Stage 2-equipped 455 engines were tearing through quarter-mile times in the 10-second range. Without nitrous, without forced induction, just pure, raw muscle. And today, the Stage 2 legacy is stronger than ever. Modern Buick restorers have resurrected lost Stage 2 builds, proving once again that this was one of the most powerful muscle car engines ever created. GM may have tried to erase it, NASCAR may have feared it, but the Stage 2 455 refuses to be forgotten. And now, more than ever, the truth is coming back to light. Imagine a world where Buick ignored GM's corporate orders, laughed in the face of NASCAR's rule changes, and unleashed the full power of the Stage 2 455 on the world. What would have happened? For starters, the Buick GSX Stage 2 would have redefined muscle cars. The 455 Stage 1 was already faster than most big blocks of its era, but the Stage 2? It was a street-legal race engine. If Buick had mass-produced it, the Stage 2 would have obliterated the Chevelle SS 454, embarrassed the Mustang Boss 429, and given the Hemi a serious fight. And what about NASCAR? If Buick had been allowed to properly develop the Stage 2 for racing, it could have been a championship-winning engine. Instead of Ford and Chrysler battling for dominance, Buick might have become a major force in stock car racing. But here's the real question. Would the Corvette have survived? If a Buick could outrun Chevy's prized sports car, how long before GM's entire corporate structure collapsed under the pressure? GM made sure this never happened. But what if they hadn't? Would Buick have become the ultimate performance brand? We'll never know. But the thought alone is terrifying. The Buick Stage 2 455 was never supposed to exist. It was a direct violation of GM's rules, a threat to the muscle car hierarchy, and a weapon that rival automakers didn't want to compete against. It was too powerful, too fast, and too dangerous, so they erased it. But here's the thing about legends. They don't die. Decades later, the truth about the Stage 2 455 is resurfacing. Car collectors, restorers, and drag racers have uncovered old parts, recreated lost builds, and tested these engines in ways Buick never officially could. And the results are shocking. This engine wasn't just hype. It was every bit as brutal as the rumors claimed. Today, surviving Stage 2 builds are some of the rarest and most feared muscle cars on the planet. And yet, Buick's name is barely mentioned in the muscle car history books. Why? Because GM and the industry don't want to admit what they buried. But now, the secret is out. The Buick Stage 2 455 was one of the greatest muscle car engines ever built. And no matter how hard they tried to kill it, the truth will never stay buried.